I'm the Assistant Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Gwinnett Mercy. I've been at the university for 3.5 years. I am the first staff member, both student-facing or institutional, to have a position that is diversity, equity, and inclusion-based. Although the position had been part of the strategic plan that had been part of the institution, it was fast-tracked in the middle of the pandemic. As you may remember, the summer of racial reckoning, there was a lot of conversations about the needs of our communities to have more leadership in regards to how do we respond to these needs. And so I was hired in the middle of the pandemic on November of 2020. I literally came into the campus for the first time to pick up my computer and left, and didn't step back into it until August of the following year. And so a lot of the planning of the start of this process that I'm going to share with you was all through Zoom, right? And meeting and getting to know a community, such as a community of mercy, right? A community that is based on our values and how we build those relationships when we're trying to do diversity, equity, and inclusion can be really tough. But I'm really proud of the work that we were able to accomplish during that particular year, and how it's been a wonderful way to build the work that now we're doing. So as we get started, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why Mercy and DEI. I'm going to talk to you and give you some of the definitions that we use, how we define the work. I'm going to place you in our current US context, right? I realize we're in Europe, right? And some of the conversations about diversity, about equity, about inclusion, about race, about gender, about sexuality, it differs from context to context. And I want to be mindful that we recognize that my presentation on what I'm going to share with you is coming from a US context, right? I'm going to share with you our process. I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges and some of the highlights and give you some numbers. So, but when I joined Gwinnett Mercy, and when I had never worked at a Mercy institution, I grew up in Colombia, and some of you I've shared, I'm an immigrant, right? I came into the US as a 21-year-old. And finished my undergrad in Penn State. So I came from a Catholic country. I grew up in a Catholic environment. But then I've been in the US, and although I've worked at Christian institutions and other institutions of higher ed, I had never worked or known any Sisters of Mercy, or this mercy charism that kind of drives this work. And so trying to think through, like, how do I do this work within this context? One of the key things that I think drove me was the idea of what is our greatest need? And if you can, think back to that November, like my first day at Gwinnett was November 1st. It was an election. November. Right in the middle of the pandemic, when some of us were still, remote, some of us were trying to figure out, how to get back to our in person with our students, and we were in the midst of a lot of conversations about what racial inequality, and can we talk about equity, and how can we respond to the deaths of Black Americans by police, right? And so that's what we were having. And so when we think about how do we meet this need, and how can we say it's never enough, right? And so that's kind of the impetus that kind of got me to doing this work and has guided some of this work. And so some of my colleagues have already shared some of our values and our mission. But a key part, and some of you might have individuals in my position in your universities, I know that not all Mercy universities have a DEI person. And so DEI positions kind of fall in different areas of higher ed. Some of them fall in HR, some of them fall within the provost office. I think there's an opportunity within Catholic institutions, specifically Mercy institutions, for this position to fall within the mission umbrella. And so I am an assistant vice president that reports to the vice president of mission, Jim over there. So if I do a good job, remember, if you've been to any of the Dublin tourist attractions, they're always like, leave me a recommendation. Say Tatiana if I've done a good job. Say something else if I'm say Kathy if I've done a really bad thing. But I think when looking at the mission of the university on diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really does resonate. What with our values and both with our mission. We're talking about not only are we rooted in the traditions of the Sisters of Mercy, but we want to prepare students to be successful for careers and meaningful lives in a global society. Right? And we talk about our values being integrity of word and deed, the respect of the dignity of each person, which is key when we're talking about diversity, when we're talking about equity, when we're talking about inclusion. About service to society, as some of my peers have shared, and that social justice in a diverse world. What does all of that mean when we're talking about all of this? So one of the first things that we did as an institution, and I see Carol nodding. It was a process. So one of the key things is we have a beautiful mission. We have beautiful values. We have amazing critical concerns, right? But even in that conversation, we still were struggling as a community to have the conversation of how does this fit in? I don't know if you've had this conversation before. I know I have a lot. In our community, as we were starting this journey but we are doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't need to have this conversation. We have the critical concerns. We are doing mercy. We've got this, right? I've been in this institution for fill in the blank years. I know what I'm talking about. I do anti-racism in my class, right? I talk about women's issues. I do social justice. So we don't need this new language. We don't need this new DEI. We don't need this. Why are you here? Right? And so what we tried to do was to make that transition easy and say, this is why we need to do this. And so this becomes an additional piece of our mission. It is our diversity, equity, and inclusion mission statement. And so it reads, Gwinnett Mercy University's core values of integrity of word and deed, respect and dignity of all people, service to society in a social justice, and social justice in a diverse world, places inclusive excellence at the center of our daily work and our relationship as a Catholic Mercy University. Inclusive excellence recognizes that to advance our mission successfully, we must value, engage, and include the rich diversity of all the members of our community. In seeking to live this commitment faithfully, we must first acknowledge how we are continuously influenced by the collective history of systemic inequity in society at large. Despite our commitment to inclusivity, we must learn from our failures and build upon our successes to work towards a more inclusive institution that is rooted in mercy. To achieve this, our community must meaningfully internalize this work of transformation. It will require all to engage in collaborative implementation that's strategic, that strategically integrates inclusion and radical mercy into the curriculum, the co-curriculum, the administrative structures, practice, decision-making, and culture. Easy, right? Totally can do this in a year or two. Is there something in this statement that catches your eye? Radical mercy. And I know I've shared this one last year with a couple of you, and that one struck people. Yes. What else? Yes.
Acknowledging how we are continuously influenced by the collective history of systemic inequity, despite the internal commitment to inclusivity.
Yes. Yes.
It's the addition of administrative structures and decision-making and culture for me. So it's not just about the curriculum, it's about the foundations of the university.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say the last word, and culture.
And culture.
Yeah, it's really powerful change.
Yes.
To me, the last sentence in the first paragraph, inclusive excellence recognizes that to advance our mission successfully, we must value, engage, and include the rich diversity of all the members of our community.
This is a lot. And Carol was laughing at the beginning because it took us a year to work on this, to draft it, to go back to our many committees, to take it to the executive council, to take it to our faculty, our staff, our alumni, our students, to get it to the board. And in every single step, we had questions about precisely what has caught your attention. Some of it was, you're really going to say in this statement that we've made mistakes? We're a mercy institution. We do social justice. Tell me, what mistakes have we made? And that's a tough conversation, right? But in order for us to talk about systems, in order for us to say, not only are we challenging to change our curriculum or to look into our curriculum, not only do we need to look at our structures, not only do we need to do our culture. In order to do all of that, we must accept that we are not perfect. If we were perfect, none of us would be here. Right? We need mercy because we are not perfect. We need mercy because we live in a failed system that we need to address because there's needs. And so this is why this became so important, and that is precisely why we need radical mercy, which, by the way, we had so many conversations about, because people are like, really, you want to go radical? Like, that seems like such a contentious word. And you know what? It was our sisters in our board that actually said, no, that's exactly what we need. Because Jesus was radical. Because we are radical. And this work is radical. And we shouldn't be afraid to claim it and to say this is part of who we are. Right? And so when we talk about, I think a key part of this work is about defining some of it. So when we think about diversity, so many institutions and so much of the work throughout the years has been limiting. Right? Maybe diversity feels comfortable when we talk about race. Or maybe it's like the expected. Right? Like maybe not comfortable, that might be the wrong adjective, but it's the expectation. Like we're going to talk about, students of color only then. Yes, that is a key part of the population that we're going to work on, but that is not the only diversity that is present in our institution. We need to talk about gender, and even when we're talking about gender, we need to do it in a way that is inclusive beyond the dichotomy, male and female. When we talk about sexuality, we need to acknowledge that we have, as a Mercy Catholic institution, we have students and staff and faculty who are LGBT. Our climate survey done in 2022 said that about 15% of our students are LGBT, and about 8% of our staff and faculty are LGBT, right? But we also have about 52% to 60% of our students any given year are first generation students. Diverse disabilities and accessibility is also a key part of our community, and it's growing. And so many times when we think about, and I talk to my colleagues in diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're like, oh, you include accessibility? I'm like, yes. Disabilities is also part of this conversation. Or in our case, interfaith. Having conversations about, yes, we're a Catholic institution, but the faith identity of our students, our staff, and our faculty is varied. And we need to recognize it, and we need to acknowledge it, and we need to create systems to celebrate and acknowledge that diversity as well. Equity, it's all of those systems that we talked about and that we saw in that statement, right? We can't just say, welcome, right? That beautiful phrase of like, diversity is everybody gets invited to the party, right? Equity, inclusion means you get invited to dance. Equity is you have the opportunity, and we've created the ramps to make sure that you are able to get inside the party venue, right? That you have, that not only is your, the songs that are included, it's not only my songs, but your songs as well. That you are included, that you are celebrated, that you are welcome, that you have the possibility to be and to achieve your goals. In a party, might be just to have fun. In an educational institution, we want to get them to graduate. And so how do we shift that idea, that mind frame, that we need to treat everybody equally? Because that's a fallacy. Because we are not all equal. What we need to make sure is that equally we all get to graduate and walk at that stage and get that diploma. That's the goal. Equity talks about how do we create all of the systems to make sure that everybody gets to that goal. Some of that might be talking about, how to be successful and what is the career that you want to do. Some of it might be, making sure that we find that community, whether it be through singing or through service work, right? How do we make sure that the students get the support to achieve their goal? That's equity. Inclusion is the process that we're actually creating and celebrating and engaging each person and welcoming them, right? And for us, the way that we've defined radical mercy, which I know you are all waiting for it, is that an assertive disposition that places respect, integrity, service, and social justice in a diverse world as a central tone to one's lifestyle and choice, specifically as it relates to the members of our Gwinnett Mercy community. Like, how do you truly, if our values is that you are truly going to be in this community, acknowledging that respect, that integrity, that service, how do you truly make that part of your reality? Like, how do you integrate it? And so let's talk a little bit about that context, because this work sounds beautiful, right? That statement is amazing. I'm so proud of it. That's 1 year and a couple of gray hairs of my life. But doing this work in today is hard on an easy day, right? Because we not only we cannot just say, welcome everybody. You are welcome to this party. You are welcome to this institution. We want you here. Just expect that just because we open the doors that you're going to be successful. Because there is a historical context that we need to acknowledge, right? We need to acknowledge that our organizations are higher ed, unless you were a primarily a HBCU or a Hispanic servant institution or indigenous servant institution. We're primarily white institutions. Our staff, our faculty, our students. And our systems, our services, our communities were created to make those individuals feel comfortable. And as our communities, our students get more diverse, are more diverse, then our contexts are gonna change. And what used to feel very comfortable 10, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, is not comfortable to all of our students anymore. It's not comfortable to our staff, to our faculty. They're not finding the community. What we have created as that mercy community does not feel merciful to them. And so how do we start to rethink that, right? Because it's not just to say, you're welcome, but we want you to be successful. We want you to feel included. We want you to belong. We want this mercy community to be your mercy community. And that might mean that I have to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And that's okay. Because they feel uncomfortable all the time. Right? And we have to acknowledge that that historical context is still there. You know, how many of us were talking about, enrollment and FERPA and FAFSA? Let's face it, every single higher ed article right now is saying the individuals that are not completing their FAFSA are students of color, or first generation students, or undocumented students, because they can't get through it. It is not set up for them. Although it was intentionally supposed to be created to make it easier. Even in that, we failed. Even when we're intentional. Right? That's a historical context. Like, we can't just say, well, how many of us have been in conversations in higher ed? Not just at our institutions, but in higher ed, where we say, well, the students are just, yes, they're more diverse, that's great, but they're not prepared. How many of us, honestly, have had that conversation, or have heard our colleagues say, it's just that the students are not ready. Like, are we lowering our expectations for diversity? But is it that they're not prepared, or is it that we are not meeting the needs of those students? If mercy is meeting the greatest need, is finding a way, shouldn't a mercy higher ed institution be about creating equitable learning environments that allow the students that have historically, in K-12, not gotten the support that others have, to making sure that in higher ed they do? Let's also acknowledge that there's a lot of anti-DEI national effort, and that's a reality, right? There's a lot of legislations about efforts. There's a lot, like, if you, whether it be legislations, whether it be about Florida, whether it be about Texas, whether it be about Utah, North Carolina, South Dakota, North Dakota, you name it, there are so many conversations. I have known so many of my colleagues who have decided that they cannot do this work anymore. Diversity, equity, and inclusion chief diversity officers, their tenure right now is an average of 3 years nationally. Right? The amount of pushback, the amount of my colleagues whose titles have had to shift to make sure that they are able to continue to do the work in the institution without being completely targeted, is so much. And even within Mercy institutions, that conversation is happening. Right? That is the reality. And that's not even talking about like higher education. Right? And everything else that is going on, the challenges with higher education, our cost, our access, our retention, everything else. So there's a lot that is going on. So this is a map. I know if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you see it. Take a look at it. This is the map from the Chronicle of Higher Education about the anti-DEI legislations happening in the U.S. There have been 85 anti-DEI legislations introduced. 14 have had final legislative approval, so those are the light greens. 14 have become law, those are the dark greens. And 47 have been tabled or failed to pass or being voted. We are in Pennsylvania. Our first anti-DEI legislation was introduced in early February. It has not gone beyond just the initial introduction, but one of the key things that we're learning nationally is that these types of legislation do not go away. They get reintroduced every legislation session in the hopes that they will have enough to do. And they have deep, deep repercussions, not just within whether we can have these types of conversations, whether these type of conversations and supports are funded, whether our students are receiving the support that we know that they need, whether we are able to actually walk the students through graduation, but also understanding that it like some of the legislation that for example, the Pennsylvania one, which is again copied and pasted from so many other states, it says that all diversity, race, gender, or sexuality trainings or classes need to be stripped, including for curriculum, without taking into account accreditation. And so for our faculty in the room, like that's scary because so many of accrediting bodies have included DEI into and social justice, right? And so if we take that, if legislations in trying to create and get these legislations passed don't even know some of the many implications that it can have into our structures. So this is our process. So I got hired November 2020. In 2021 and 2022, we created the DEI plan. And Carol was actually in my DEI working group during the first 3 years. So we created a diversity, equity, and inclusion working group. I'm new to the community. I don't know the needs. I don't know the community. And I can't get to know you because we're in Zoom. So we put together a number of individuals from across the university. We had faculty, we had staff. We had some student input, but we didn't have students in the committee in that moment because there was a lot on the plates of students at that time. And as much as we wanted their input, we wanted to also be mindful of what we were asking. And so the students had been providing a lot of input, had even done their own needs assessments and kind of climate assessments, and so they had collected a lot of information that informed some of the work. And so we created the plan through Zoom, through many a meeting, and then we also started working on some policies that as I came in, we realized that we were missing. So we did have a religious observance policy, but we didn't have a chosen name policy. So if you don't know what a chosen name policy is, it talks about the need to create a policy for students or staff or faculty that go by a legal, by a name different from their legal name. And that might be based on gender, but that might be, actually it's a great tool for international students, right? That whose their name doesn't really, it becomes, they go by a different name just in the US. And so that's something. I actually use Jim's example all the time. His name is James, he goes by Jim. So it's an easy way to make sure that all of our systems match how he would like to be named. We also worked on a bias protocol. We didn't have a bias policy, so we made sure that we created a process. That also took about a year to create, and it was a lot of conversations with staff and faculty because whenever we talk about bias, everybody gets scared, right? Let's face it. Whenever I call somebody and there's anything about that, they're like, what did I do? I'm like, nothing. I just wanted to have coffee with you. But there's that feel. And we also created community resource groups. So in thinking about culture and that work and life balance, one of the key strategies that we've created are what in industry might be employee resource groups. We call those community resource groups. And they are meant to be about diverse identities that our community holds. Right now, every year, we've added a different one. The first one was our Spectrum group, which is our staff and faculty who are LGBT or allies. Our second group was our staff and faculty group of color. And then our latest one is our first generation staff and faculty group. On year one, we worked on the DEI statement that I shared with all of you. We also did our climate survey, our first in many years. And we also started to create some spaces for capacity building for staff and faculty. So we realized that we needed to start creating some baseline learning opportunities for staff and faculty so that we were talking the same language, right? Like we were having kind of the same conversations. And so we developed 3 modules. The first one is What's It Something I Said, which actually is being phased out this spring, which is really like, I just put my foot in my mouth. What do I do now? Or, I think you put your foot on your mouth. Let me have this conversation with you. We also we created a module about bias, which is a conversation about we all have biases, and it really is a great conversation and a gateway to the bias process, because if we all can accept that we are flawed and we have biases, then we can hopefully more easily have the conversation when a bias report comes in and is about you, that it is an educational opportunity and that it's not the end of your career, but it is something like we all have biases. Let's talk about it. Let's see how we can remedy it. Our bias process, it is meant to be an educational process. It is different from our harassment and discrimination process. And so that is the key distinction. So something can be submitted to the bias process, and it can be, most of them are just, again, an educational process. If something does become, and it's clear that it could be harassment or discrimination, then it's immediately routed to that policy. It is not handled through our bias process. And in our last year, we decided those 3 modules that I talked about, we made them into a certificate. So it's now a foundational certificate, which we all love certificates, right? And so that actually created a lot of buy-in within our community. Last year, for those that were there, we talked about our anti-racism efforts. So a key part of our DEI plan is thinking about how do we start living this anti-racism critical concern. So we came up with that strategy for that, and we've mapped out some new metrics for our DEI plan. This is our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. So it has 4 main goals. Our first one is all about the climate, the experience of our community. That includes our students, our staff, and our faculty. The second one is about the recruitment of underrepresented and minoritized students and enhances their retention, their persistence by supporting their growth and success. Our goal 3 is similar, but it's about staff and faculty. And our last one is about that robust curricular and co-curricular experience for our students. These are 4 goals. Each goal has so many strategies into it. The anti-racism strategy is somewhere here. Our climate survey is somewhere here. Our staff and faculty development process is somewhere here and here. Our community resource groups are somewhere in our retention or staff and faculty. So all of these pieces that I've been talking to you about, all of them connect to our DEI plan. And let's face it, when we started this, I'm so glad that this graphic never had numbers and years. Because it's gonna take us a lifetime. I have hopefully job security, but who knows in this time? Because this is our work on any given year. This doesn't end, right? And as we create more spaces for more identities to be recognized, more and more other identities might come up and say, hey, now that it's safe for them, can you make it safe for me? And so this will grow and this will develop. I'm gonna just briefly share with you some data. This is our students right now for the fall entirely. I acknowledge that this gender piece, it only has male and female, but it is what we report to the Department of Education. They currently only allow us to report in that dichotomy, and I think they're finally starting conversations about amplifying that. Our race and ethnicity, again, we're a primarily white institution. 55% of our students are white. About 27% of our students are racially and ethnically diverse, and about 17% we do not know. And we have a high range of diversity within age. This is brand new of the press. This is going to be our diversity not benchmark. It's just a snapshot of our university, and this will be available on our website, and it's part of Goal 1. This is our faculty and staff, and so primarily female and primarily white, right? 75% of our faculty is white, about 5% are African American, and Asian and Hispanic is 1%. Very low, right? Primarily one institution. I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna make this really quick. I think a lot of our challenges, that initial conversation that I was talking to you about, like why DEI and how does it connect to Mercy, those were tough conversations, right? Like how do you challenge somebody's values? And less challenge, but I think what I would say it was more about how do we broaden this idea of mercy to include this type of conversation. We're not taking it away. We're not saying what you have done is wrong. What we're saying is there is a new way to have this conversation. How do we amplify it so that we're doing it even better? Because let's face it, this idea of mercy, the way that I keep talking about it is like, if mercy is the goal, diversity, equity, and inclusion is our path, is our way. Because we haven't gotten there. The world is not there. So how do we get there? So success is a challenging piece in this work. What is success when it keeps moving, right? What does it mean to be inclusive? Are we inclusive to, if we get inclusivity with one group, are we doing it for all? Are we missing somebody? Is somebody not at the table? Who are we missing? And also I think a lot of higher ed has become very metric centered. And so although we do want to have metrics, the reality is that some of this work is not a number, it's a feeling. And some of the outside the box ways of telling the story is about telling a story. It's, could be as simple as having that cup of tea and having that conversation. And that is not quantifiable in percentages and numbers. And so how do we are able to tell the full story in a way that still gets us the funding that we need, right? The increasing challenging context, I can't say this enough. It is tough. It is tough to read the many articles every day in higher ed, in diverse in all of the different publications in higher ed, and seeing how much of this work is being stripped away every day. How much of our students are not being recognized, how their experience are not being included, how we are just minimizing individuals in such a way. So if you have a DEI person in your community, check in with them. Help them. They need it. And last but not least, resources, right? We're in a time of limited resources, and so how can we do amazing things with limited resources and the resources we have? I'm an office of one, and so I can't do the work, I can't achieve that amazing plan or that statement without every single one of my staff and faculty. They're a resource. But that also means that in their many responsibilities, they have to integrate this work and welcome this conversation. So some highlights, recruitment, just changing the way that we count and we have the conversation. It's not just about the students and the high schools and the GPAs. It's about the first generation. It's about their race. It's about their ethnicity, their pronouns. How are we making sure that we are really trying to understand the students that we're recruiting, the staff, the faculty, the intentional community, that retention and belonging, whether it be through student organizations, community resource groups, so many things, and building capacity. The DEI Foundational Certificate, as of the end of this spring semester, 94 staff and 61 faculty have completed all 3 modules. And we are definitely building some partnerships with teaching and learning. So pictures, this is our community raising the LGBT flag. We do that every year. These are the stalls that we now have a way to bring in some of that diversity and identity into our celebrations. And this is our end of the year dinner for our community resource groups that happened just early this May. And yeah. This is a picture of some of our diversity, equity, and inclusion working group this year. And these are some of our students who completed the leadership, anti-racism leadership program that we have for them. Yes?
Mercyhurst is similar to all of the universities presented here in this area. What was announced a month ago is that Mercyhurst is going major Division I in all its athletics. Now, athletes, there's a lot of diversity in major division, well, any division in terms of athletics.
Yes.
My question, does Gwinnett Mercy have athletics now?
We are Division III, and we do have, similarly, I think that becomes an interesting conversation with athletics of like the diversity that is recruited in some of these teams, and how do we create spaces to acknowledge some of that.
Have you thought about any community, you mentioned community groups for athletes? A lot of us are, we're going to have a unique mix of students coming up soon. And have you thought about that?
So the community resource groups particularly are for staff and faculty. We do have student organizations that are identity-based. Some of our athletes are part of those, so our Black Student Union and others, the students are part of those. We also, for our Weaving Equity leadership certificate, we've actually done some specific outreach to our teams. And so we work with our director of camp athletics and saying, of your leaders in these different teams, can you encourage them to be part of these leadership training so that they become more aware and it becomes a grassroots effort from the students' perspective as they want to have more conversations. It's interesting, we had a student this year who was an athlete, He is a white male that came from an environment where these conversations were not welcome. He signed up. Usually we have a level 1 and a level 2. He did both. And he came back, and there is a mentoring component to this. And he was talking to his mentor, and he's like, I had never had the opportunity to have this conversation. I had never had the opportunity to have a conversation about bias and white privilege. And he was able to finally have that space in this.
Now, in one last question, going in, and again, we've always been Division II except hockey, which is Division I. But the word bias, first of all, over the last month or a couple months, I've been, in this announcement, you hear many faculty complain about athletics. Do you feel that there are any biases of faculty members towards their athletes that are in class? Whether they're white males, do you feel that and do you think that should be addressed?
I think bias in general needs to be addressed. I think that we can't say you have bias against a particular group if we don't first acknowledge that we have biases. And that is, if we can't even get there, individual conversations are gonna be hard, right? If we can't acknowledge that I have been programmed to believe certain things, whether I acknowledge them or not, whether I actually voice them or not, they're there, right? We've been socialized to have those. And so some of them might be, conscious biases towards athletes. Some might be unconscious biases through athletes. But again, that is a larger conversation.
It is.
And I think, again, some of that is it bias towards athletes, or is it bias towards the students that are going to be recruited, the background that they are, the race, the schools? There is a lot there to unpack, that it can be just athletes or it can be a lot more. Yes?
Do you have a mechanism, for students to give input about what kind of topics you'd pick on training faculty and staff, aside from just a complaint system? Yeah, 'cause that's a big one.
So I will say we have, and I've done this now in 2 institutions, is our bias process does allow us to better understand some of the blind spots that as a community we have. And so we do use that complaint process, that bias process is a key place where we can start. But now we do have students in a diversity, equity, and inclusion working group. So we have 1 to 2 students who are part of that. And so they are always welcome. And these student leaders are not quiet, right? And they are, this program, and I didn't talk much about it, this program includes an e-course that students take. Then they do a 1-day, full-day training with us. And then they have mentoring by staff and faculty. And then that's followed with additional events that they have to go through during the year. And then they get the certificate, right? And so they develop a conversation through with their mentors. And it also includes a reflection piece that allows us to get some additional insight into what their experiences have been in and outside of the university that guides some of that.
Great.
Yeah. Yes, Jaime, and then.
I have a lot of things to say, but
Oh my goodness.
I'm going to just do 3. So, one, I recently learned, and I don't know how many of you know this, but it blew my mind. The historical disparities between different racial groups, and how, because white people were allowed to own property and the other races weren't, the fact that many families had property and had wealth has grown over time. So people inherit houses, inherit land, inherit other things, whereas many slaves and immigrants have no ways of starting from that. And if you multiply that by how many years it has been going on, people start just from that one perspective many steps behind the starting line. So to me that really blew my mind. Exactly,
The historical context.
The other part that really I felt very moved by is I think you do have a component of educational support, but I'm curious to know, do you have like courses or trainings or something included in your plan? Because a lot of people don't know this information. They
For staff or faculty, or for
for
students?
both, for
Everybody?
everybody, yeah.
So for staff and faculty, the anti-racism work that we did, that I actually presented on last year, was an opportunity that it was a community, it's from our county. It was an effort from Bucks and Montgomery County, and they did a year-long racial learning community for different nonprofits. And so I offered, for example, I sent it out to individuals on the community and said, who would like to join us? And so we had a group of staff and faculty, about 10 of them, and we committed to being part of that racial learning community for a year. And now they've become our racial equity committee, and we meet now on a monthly basis, and we've used that knowledge to indicate some of the anti-racism work that we're going to do. We're going to continue, all of that information that we gathered during that year is now part of we have a DEI Canvas site that is available for staff and faculty, where we have a lot of our information, a lot of self-guided information for staff and faculty, so all of that information is there. We've also have been talking about potentially doing some book clubs and stuff like that, so we can continue that conversation in a broader sense. For students, actually, the leadership certificate becomes that. So the level 1 is very much about big ideas, bias, white supremacy, privilege. The second part, level 2, is primarily about starting that conversation about racial history in the U.S. and also LGBT history in the U.S. So it has both of those components. So slowly but surely we're addressing it.
And unfortunately, when you open it to people as a voluntary thing, most of the time people who attend these things are already people that know about them. So that we might have to do some mandatory stuff so people who don't know anything and don't care actually learn about it. Right?
So there's a lot of challenges with mandatory. I've done mandatory ones in previous institutions. And we've decided not to do it at Gwinnett. The certificate actually became a really wonderful way to incentivize it. It is up for the individuals, supervisors, to decide whether they were going to mandate it as part of their organization, and some people have. The nursing department about 2 years ago, actually, the dean was like, every faculty needs to complete this by the end of the year. That was their decision, and I was completely pleased. But that does depend. I think also, again, that national context. Mandatory DEI trainings are being challenged, and so we are stepping back from doing that just to be preemptive about that, and also we are also trying to make sure that we're not calling them trainings in the sense of you get it and you can check it off and it's done. If this is development, this is professional development. This is something that it is continuous and will need ongoing preparation, because if they're not going to retain, right? So being transparent about who we are and creating those community resource groups has been key, because as you're saying, like the one faculty member in nursing who's African American, or the 2 African American faculty members in education, or the one faculty member in public health. right? And so, but it can be really isolating. And some of them, we have one faculty member in education that has been part of our community for 20 some years. Most people don't know her. And so to be able to just say, you know what, this day on, like, we are gonna have lunch together, and we all go to our restaurant, Waldron, and we sit down, and all of a sudden there's a long table with 12, 14 of us. And our students are like, I didn't know we had that many staff and faculty of color. I'm like, yeah, we're all here having lunch. Like, yes, we're few, and we acknowledge that in spaces, we sometimes are the only, but you're not alone. And so how do you build that community transparently and honestly? I know there were 2 more questions. Let me go over there, and then I'll go.
So I'm just curious about how you have collaborated with the HR office. I know there's a lot of overlap, and I'm just curious about what that has looked like for you.
So in different ways, and it really does depend on who's in that role, and we've had several people in that role. HR, for example, the bias process was a collaboration between my office, the Dean of Students, HR, and the Provost Office. And between the 4 of us, we created a process that met our needs and our policies. So it's been a collaboration. A recent addition is to Jaime's point of, like, not everybody's getting trained. Our HR just signed up for Percipio, the online training. And so instead of saying, no, only IT gets mandatory trainings, in our climate survey, one of the key findings that we had was that our staff, our faculty, and our students of color were experiencing microaggressions at a much higher level than any other population on our community. And so based on that, although we are having conversations about bias, we are not having conversations about microaggressions. And so, we also are recognizing that some of our employee groups, like Plant and others, are not being encouraged to go through the modules that we have. And so Percipio becomes a great way to identify. So I identify the DEI-related trainings. I give those to HR, and HR then is able to give to the supervisors, like, these are some recommended ones from Tatiana. So the fact the supervisors are not having to say, like, I don't know which one, and all of a sudden I give the wrong one, and it's counterproductive. So that is 2 examples.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, Tatiana. Your emphasis on the anti-DEI national movement was illuminating for me. I think until your presentation, I mean, I was aware that it was going on. I had seen that Chronicle graphic, but I think I was minimizing it in my own mind to say, well, this is just an anomaly here and there. So I really appreciate your highlighting it. I guess for us in this room, or for my information, are there advocacy work being done, like that's either mercy-oriented or broader Catholic higher ed, or what are you aware of in terms of advocacy for?
So, lead diversity officers, or chief diversity officers, like they're sometimes called, problematic there, but we have a national organization called the NADAHE, the National Association for Diversity Officers in Higher Education. It is a great organization. If your individual is not part of it, I would highly recommend that they become a member. You can also become an institutional member, and then more individuals can get some of the information through it. We have a national meeting. Again, is one that I highly recommend individuals in this position to attend, because it does give you the framework about what's going on nationally. And it gives you the ideas of how people are addressing some of this. I was just in the national session in Washington State, and it was illuminating, even for me, to be able to go to a session by some of the folks in Texas and talking about how they had some of the similar legislations that we're seeing in Pennsylvania, what some of their advocacy was, how it's been affecting them, how they're responding, and how they continue to do that. And so those are some conversations that we can't have in open forums. These are conversations that need to be had in spaces where we feel safe, because again, these are DEI officers in different states are getting subpoenaed, not just their their work emails or their phones, but their personal phones and their personal emails getting subpoenaed, because let's face it, our work and our life mix, and they know that, and so they subpoena absolutely everything. We've had individuals where the FBI and where they're being investigated, right? Like, they're not feeling safe, and so this is. It's concerning, and we can't. And I think one of the biggest takeaways nationally has been like, yes, some of our institutions might be in states that currently or recently didn't have these types of legislations, but they're coming, and so we need to prepare.